forum is sponsored by AT&T, represented by Dave Kendall, OCLC, represented by a table of their associates here, and Help Wizards. Please, let's thank all of them for their support. And now I'd like to invite the man behind the curtain, Dave Kendall, to the microphone. It's all yours.
AT&T is delighted to sponsor today's event. We're talking about the future. I want you to consider this. Everyone in this room is living in the future that our grandparents could only dream about. We have arrived. We are in the future. So who would have known when you were sitting at your desk not too many years ago with that shiny new 56K modem and you thought you were screaming on the internet? Who would have known that we would have smartphones and tablets and thousands of apps and clouds, which we'll probably hear about here in just a bit. So here we are, we're witnessing the convergence of the phone, the internet, the TV, of voice data, of media, of HD, of 3D, and perhaps in the future, holographic TV. AT&T is playing a huge role in the transformation away from outdated copper-based public switched networks, and we're moving to IP-based fiber networks and super fast wireless networks. Now, why are we doing that? Because the world is going wireless. We call our initiative Project VIP, which commits an additional $14 billion above and beyond the $20 billion that we invest annually right here in our country. So we're going to be delivering 4G technology to 300 million Americans in less than 2 years. And we're very, very excited about the future. So one final point before I introduce our panel, and it's really more of a request. Here it is. Please don't text and drive. All right? Please don't text and drive. It's against the law in Ohio, and it's super dangerous. You're 23 times more likely to get into a crash when you're texting and driving. It's more dangerous than driving drunk. At least when you're driving drunk, you're trying to stay on the road. When you're texting, your eyes are off the road. So please, no text, no email, no phone call is worth risking your life, and that's about your future. So on that happy note, I would like to introduce today's panel. A biography for each speaker is in your flyer, so I will provide only brief introductions. Our first speaker is the Chief Information Officer for The Ohio State University. Please welcome Kathy Starkoff. Our next speaker is the Chief Information Officer for the state of Ohio. Please welcome Stu Davis. Our next speaker is the Senior Vice President and Senior Chief Technology Officer at Nationwide Mutual Insurance. Please welcome Guru Vasudeva. Today's moderator is a familiar face here at the CMC. He is a partner with Quick Solutions. Please welcome John Hrusovsky. On behalf of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, AT&T, OCLC, and the Help Wizards, please welcome all of our panelists. And John, the microphone is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We already now have one of the topics that we're going to talk about off the schedule. We're going to talk about the ability to be able to text and drive at the same time. So we're now down to 6 topics versus 7. All right, so here's what we're going to try to do. We've got about a half an hour before we get to questions. We're going to try to actually cover about 6 topics from an IT perspective. And I'll kind of introduce each topic, and then I'll ask the panel to speak on behalf of that topic. The idea here, to build off of what Dave was saying, is that we're talking about the future. And so we're looking for kind of an insightful conversation. I may use the term a provocative conversation as we go through this. And these 3 are picked so that we can have that type of conversation. And so with that being said, the first topic we're going to talk about is enterprise collaboration. the concept of organizations being able to collaborate across multiple aspects of their business or their organization. So I'm going to first turn it over to Kathy to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, John. If there's one word that I think about as you think about the future of technology, it is about collaboration. And I say that from a people perspective as well as from a technology perspective. As I think 5 and 10 years out, I think the real opportunity in IT is leveraging integration. So leveraging integration of different technology, whether it be hardware, whether it be software, but integrating technology in order to provide us new wisdom, new outlook, new insights into things. And I think about collaboration then from a people perspective. And both of them are related. In the past, we thought about technology and getting efficiencies out of technologies, whether it's driving more transactions, getting transactions done cheaper. But I think the real leverage in the future is, again, matching big data with mobility. And particularly at Ohio State, we're very interested in collaboration because we think drawing the same parallel where we're matching up insights in business with nursing or insights of engineering with agriculture really represent the breakthroughs for the future. So we're focused on putting tools in the hands of experts that help them get access to data that they can use. Simple access, simple tools that allow them not to be focused on the technology, but to be focused on applying their expertise to the data or the insights that technology provide. And I think, again, that's data. We're going to talk more about big data. I think the opportunities for visualization where I can provide you visualization of insights that then you're able to share with other folks outside your discipline to create yet stronger correlations and new insights is the future of collaboration.
Thank you. Stu, would you like to add on to that?
I absolutely would. That was well said. And I appreciate being here today to have the opportunity to participate in this. From a collaborative point of view, we really started with those tools about version control. So we would have a meeting and everybody would have a different version of a particular project. So that's kind of where it started for us at the state level, and has grown really into engaging with different groups and getting different perspectives so that you can collaborate and have at least the representation of 26 different agencies, 70 boards and commissions to get engaged in the process so nothing's a surprise, as well as get their perspectives, their insights on the things that drive their particular business. Because as much as we might think we know what they need from a customer's standpoint, it's always a good thing to actually vet it with the customer. And those collaborative tools really allow us that ability to do that. So we agree 100% with where this is going. I think it's going to only grow. You're going to have more opportunities from a citizen's standpoint to engage in government. I think that's actually where we're headed, is trying to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the citizen through the process and making sure that we have the IT on the backside that's going to enable those types of processes as we go forward.
John, can I have one more,
You sure
please?
can.
Because I think another piece that reminded me, Stu, when you were speaking, I think a key future element as we think about collaboration is global. So today, you know, we're focused on our organizations. I talked about cross-college, you talk about cross-state, but I think as we think 5 years out, it's really about engaging people globally and being able to do that in a secure way, understanding who they are. It's really important to us from a research community to be able to do that with the research universities in the United States today, but you can certainly see where that's going to be going globally very quickly and with good results.
A tremendous cultural shift is really, we're right in the middle of it, all the way across the boards, from private sector to academia to the citizenry to the state governments. I mean, it's going to be an exciting time.
Before we move on, Guru, would you mind maybe talking a little bit more about what Nationwide's doing around enterprise collaboration?
Let's see, you know, for me, it really brings together a little bit of mobile, a little bit of the tools for social computing, how we use it. Inside Nationwide, we've got our own kind of a Facebook version. We use Yammer, which is a tool that actually recently Microsoft bought them, so that we can actually have the conversation inside. We also have a very good SharePoint network that actually allows us to collaborate. So we're really trying to bring all of them together, trying to create the kind of environment that you all have at home, try to recreate them at work, which is very hard to do because at home, you don't necessarily have the same kind of security needs that you do in the companies, right? So how to really give that seamless experience for collaboration at the same time protecting the confidential information that we manage is tough, and we are working through that.
That actually leads very well into our second topic, which is security. So if anyone spends any time on a PC or laptop, or on your phone for that matter, security is an incredibly difficult challenge. Organizations deal with it quite a bit in so many ways, and it's becoming more and more of an issue for us as individuals or organizations. So with that being said, Guru, why don't you take this one? Before you do that, though, I did want to mention this. I love having these three folks on the panel. I think they really represent our community incredibly well from an IT perspective. And I love having the fact that the person's name of Guru is on my panel. I think that's like perfect.
It's nice to be sitting next to Guru.
I wanted to be Guru, but he said he had that name taken already. So Guru,
I
you're up.
always
Security.
say that my parents had high expectations. Trying every day to meet it. So from a security perspective, I think the fundamental thing that's shifting is the way we looked at security was build a firewall so you can actually protect all of the things that you manage inside the enterprise very well. But as you know, you read the Wall Street Journal, pretty much, whether it be New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Federal Reserve Board, CIA, are all getting breached. And if you really think about the motivations as to why people are really breaching is totally changed. A few years ago, it was to steal money. Now it is to steal intellectual capital. Sometimes it's actually a political statement, right? So it has got nothing to do with money or intellectual capital. It is really trying to make a particular statement. So as a result, we need to really rethink how we protect our confidential information. And for me, with the firewall, it's almost like we built an island around our infrastructure, right? We built moats around them. But the unfortunate thing is, now the way things are all connected, enemies no longer need to really come through the ship to the island. They can actually come using a helicopter, which we didn't think of in the past. So in that kind of an analogy, they can actually come and land in our backyard. So we really need to start thinking differently, and that is, in our mind, in my mind, what I believe the security is going to evolve is leverage all of that tools like firewalls and the other technologies, defense in depth, but we really need associates to become the firewall, become the perimeter. So increasing education so that you're really doing safe cyber practices is the only way I believe that we can actually protect what matters most.
Very good, thank you. Stu?
Yeah,
please.
and again, I mean those are all important things. We have at least 26 islands that we have to protect, and a lot of times they can get to one island and then create a bridge to another island. So our whole security posture has more to do with consistency in how we apply the security and making sure that we are overlapping those security measures. And a lot of times we have protected ourselves from each other, and it makes it much more difficult to provide shared services. So as we collapse the network, as we collapse some of those things, we want to make sure that we're implementing the appropriate security levels that allow, if we are breached, that they only get access to a certain area and we can quickly isolate that and stop the bleeding, if you will. And at the same time, to your point, we have a lot of activity, especially in the government side, where it's just a statement. And we had a denial of service attack. I think you guys were probably right right behind us on that, probably back in December, that lasted about 3 or 4 days, that was coming out of Eastern Europe. And I mean, just the time it spent to go and knock those things down, working with Ornet and everybody else to sort of get that squared away, and then having other states contact us and say, how did you guys deal with that, and work through that issue. I think the more we talk about it, the more education that we have out there, the more awareness that happens through this process will be critical for us, because you're going to get hacked at some point in time. I mean, it's somewhat inevitable, and whatever we can do to keep it from being a very bad breach is really what we want to focus on, because we know we can't anticipate every single thing. They're getting so much more sophisticated in how they attack us and how they get in. And to your point too, I mean, they're looking for different things than we were thinking about probably 5 years ago. So.
Please,
I'd like to
Kathy.
add a point here, because I think it's really interesting. We started out talking about collaboration and giving individuals access, easy access to more and more data, and integrating data sources. And then we talk about security. And I think this is the great challenge of the CIO position, which is rolling out the availability, giving access, giving simple access, and yet doing so in a way that protects the assets of the organization. And I see, as we think about the future, that access, simple access, needs to increase exponentially, the availability will increase exponentially, and the threats will continue to grow and morph in ways that we are surprised by.
So we already know how we can secure everything, we just take it off the network. So, which we all know that's not a possibility. And to your point, I mean, the more transparency that we have, the more integrated type activities we have, the more shared services that we provide, the more at risk, and our security posture has to get so much more stronger, and you have to balance that with the business of the state, with the business of the university, with all the things that it's tremendous. Because I can tell you, we've had chief security officers that will be so stringent on how we do things that you can't do the things you need to do. And so you have to balance those two things in making sure that you're as secure as you possibly can, but still enabling the business of the agency.
Excellent. Okay, third topic. I feel like I'm kind of at a restaurant where you get a sample platter, right? And you spend a few minutes on each one. You can't, we could spend detailed discussions around each of these topics, but we're just trying to get an overall feel for some of the big topics and kind of where it's going. The next topic is unified communications. And this is actually an area that's, in my estimation, is relatively new, and it's in infancy as it relates to an applied aspect of technology. And so what we're talking about is the concept of unifying all communication channels from a technology perspective. And Stu, you're up first.
You know, I can't stand voicemail. I hate voicemail. So the ability for a voicemail to be converted to email is a much easier process for me. And that's kind of what I think of when I talk about unified communications, is the ability to have variety of channels of communication come in through the way that you're sort of wired personally to be able to bring it in. So the ability for video services, the ability for IP-based type voice over IP, those kind of things are really what we're talking about in that space. And we have looked at that from a state perspective, and I'll give you sort of a high view on this. You know, we had several agencies that were doing their own voice over IP implementations, and we kind of went back to them and said, look, you're not a telephone company, are you? I mean, is that in your mission? I mean, I don't think it is. Is it safe for the Department of Health that I'm supposed to be a telephone company? So let's get the telephone company folks, the people that deal with that on a regular basis, and move that out and look at a hosted solution in that space. And I think that that's the direction that we're going from a state perspective, is if it doesn't make sense for us to provide these types of services, we need to look at different venues and different avenues and different marketplaces that will provide the services that we need to get the agency's business done, but at the same time, it's not our core competency. We need to look at where we can take those. And the whole unified communication piece is a tremendous burden on the pipes and the networking components that we have in there, and making sure that the underpinning for all of that communication is squared away is going to be a tremendous lift. And those pipes are only going to get bigger and need to be bigger as we move through this whole unified communication component.
Kathy?
Well, I won't go so far as to say I hate voicemail, but I love all technology. So I want to go to the future aspect of this because I think we are challenged where it is today, and I've got voicemail at work, I've got voicemail at home, I've got voicemail on my mobile device, I've got Facebook, tweeting, so on. So if I could imagine a future that is not dependent on the limitations that we have today, I would think of mobile devices that would personalize the integration of all those and know what things I'm most interested in and what apply some sort of what we call artificial intelligence to bring those things that truly are urgent to the forefront and those that can wait to wait. So, for instance, and the good example that is texting. 2 or 3 years ago when we texted, it was a very small group of people, and it was urgent sort of matters. Is anybody else getting overloaded with texts? Urgent, not so urgent, sort of things. So the future, I think, is intelligence and integration applied to all of these different technologies in a way that again is meaningful. So during the day, and in a mobile way. So I'm presenting, and in the very off chance that a system would have an issue at Ohio State, boom, up to the forefront. But the other 100 texts or 200 emails fall behind. So I would like for AT&T to develop that technology.
That's on record. We're filming.
And you heard it here first.
Let's move on to mobile. And so we've kind of touched on it a little bit. And so now when we talk about mobile, we're talking about multi-platforms. So Kathy, you're up first to talk about kind of your thoughts on where you think that's going.
Mobile's the word, right? I mean, everything we've been talking about just assumes that in the future world, any sort of information, whether it be sophisticated, whether it be as simple as text, is available in a mobile form. At the university, we're very keen to engaging with where students are. What are 18-year-olds thinking about, not only as a defense mechanism on security, but to understand what we should be thinking about. And email and workstations are for old people, and no offense to anybody here, but we do see that urgent messages that we're trying to get out to students, email, we would do it as a second or a third sort of thing. So I think mobile is how all of our data will need to be delivered.
Guru, I know you have a 4-year-old. Do you text with her?
Not yet, but my 8-year-old, yes, we do. Let me take a different angle about future of mobile. Recently, I heard that teenagers who text a lot, mostly with a thumb, right? If you watch what finger they use to really ring a doorbell, they say they use a thumb because I think it's just going to change who we are as human beings, I think, in some way. It's an evolution, maybe like this, who knows. But that's maybe not a good, yeah, exactly, bigger thumbs. But on a more serious note, though, PC is pretty much dead, I think, if you really think about the future. It's going to be tablets and mobile devices that just you can use to do a lot of different things. If only the security aspect of trying to do everything that I want to do from a company perspective, at the same time, keep it separate from what I want to do from a home perspective. That technology is already coming out. As it matures, I think it'll just totally change the way we think about computing on a day-to-day basis.
You mentioned hardware. I think the other thing, there's a lot of discussion which phone is better, which tablet is better, and I do see and I don't know if it's 5 years out, but a convergence of hardware, much like we've seen in the other platforms, where the best of class will emerge, and that will be much less interesting than the functionality that it provides.
Stu, do you want anything to that?
I think Guru hit it kind of on the head. My daughter doesn't use email. She just got an email account because she's going to be going to the Ohio State University.
Smart girl.
So yeah, I would agree. I don't know where she came from. The whole deal, though, is you're right. I mean, that's exactly how they consume communication. That's how they connect with each other. And to your point, and I'm going to maybe bleed into the next subject, but for us, I mean, that's a great segue into a new culture that doesn't think about things the same way that we think about things, and I'm talking about the gray hair in my head. I mean, this is really more about how do we bring in a younger workforce at the state and keep them engaged and not force them to sit at a workstation or have a PC or have to take some 17-inch laptop, if that's really what it's called anymore. I mean, that's kind of the deal. I think that this is our way, I think, as we move through government to change the culture, get focused on the applications and the functionality and the good things that the government can bring and the good things that we do on a regular basis. So the mobile is clearly where we're all headed, and I think it's going to completely change, if it's not already doing that, how we operate and how we function in the future with big thumbs.
One comment on mobile, I think the only constraint that I see is in the human eye to be able to see the smaller and smaller print on the small devices, so that I hope that there will be biomedical advances that will somehow incorporate the ability to see that tiny, tiny font on the very small devices we carry.
It just changes when you hand it off. Maybe it's a thumb. Well, no.
Yeah, what's interesting will be, like building on that, when the Google Glass comes out, what that might do. I don't like the idea, though, to like have all these devices around me, but it just is very interesting how the world will change.
Let's build on the cloud, the IT workforce. Stu, you touched on it a minute ago, and so why don't you talk a little bit more about kind of how you're dealing with that? How do you think we're going to have to deal with that as we move forward?
Well, I think if you look back maybe 3-4 years ago, and we started, a bunch of marketing people got together and decided a cloud was a cloud, and we became a weather forecasting kind of an environment. It's really a data center someplace, right? I mean, if you think about it, it's processing somewhere, and more than likely that's in a data center somewhere. So the cloud itself, I think, is a great tool through that cultural shift as well, because it allows us to quit thinking about going and putting my arms around a server and hugging it and making sure all the blinky lights are working, and start to think about really what the end piece of that is, which is the processing is really what we want. We don't care about that. My mom doesn't care if I'm running on Linux or Unix or Windows or whatever. All she cares about is that she's got access to the information that she's trying to get to. The cloud for us in the state perspective, we're building out our private cloud. We've had cloud solutions, if you want to call it that. We've had data centers everywhere. That's kind of part of the problem. We have 30 or so more data centers that we want to begin to collapse. And part of that whole process, we have to figure out what's going to happen with the workforce through that. And with 32% of our workforce in the IT space eligible today or within the next 3 to 5 years to retire, that's a pretty significant lift. And it does pose opportunities, though, to move and shift the culture of government and to get us focused on the right things, which is really providing services to our citizenry and getting applications that are more specific in that space. So the things that are happening in the cloud, I think like I said, if you go back 3-4 years ago, the adoption has been tremendous. I mean, I don't think anybody really knew how quickly we would see adoption of shared solutions in a cloud type of environment. I mean, it's been tremendous, the adoption, to the point where, from a state perspective, there were clearly agencies that would rather go to a solution as a service in some kind of a cloud environment rather than collapse and consolidate, which isn't really where we wanted to go. So it's an interesting process as we go through it from a state perspective.
Guru?
We think about it in different layers, right? So software as a service, an element of cloud, is very, very powerful when a solution or a process that transcends business, I should say industries, right? So for example, email in the cloud, I think it's very doable because it's the same email everywhere, right? Similarly, Salesforce.com for CRM, right? Definitely makes a lot of sense. When it comes to industry specific, it gets very interesting. Do you really give away some of the unique advantages that you might have as a company? And then there again, some things you want to differentiate yourselves on, some things you don't, right? So that's how we think about a software as a service. Having said that, many of our large organizations have 30, 40, 50-year-old applications. They're not going anywhere. So I still need data centers. In fact, we built a second really tier 4 data center here in Columbus, Ohio, because we do believe for a foreseeable future that we will continue to really house computing in-house, right? To either accommodate proprietary things that we want to keep in-house, or to really accommodate the legacy applications that they are doing their job just fine. So in that sense, when it comes to infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service, we tend to really think that the future is really going to be more on the private cloud for the big companies. For the smaller companies, on the other hand, it makes no sense to really build that infrastructure organization inside. You can definitely rent it. So the answer is different depending on which layer of the cloud you think, depending on the size and the nature of the company. That's how we see cloud evolving.
To sort of piggyback on that, I think the value and the speed of which you can do those kind of things, especially on the infrastructure platform and as a platform as a service as well as the infrastructure as a service, the ability for us to move quick, because government sometimes moves at the speed of molasses in the winter. And so the ability to do that in a very quick fashion and spin up at least the architecture and the things that you need to then look at the application component is a pretty critical thing, I think, from a state's perspective.
Before we move on, Kathy, anything else you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. All right. All right. So last topic, and we've got about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we're going to move on to questions. The last topic is big data. And we left that to the end because that is a topic that has really just recently come about. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Guru, you're up first.
Sure. When we think about big data, at one level, individual advancements that we have seen in that space are really evolutionary, right? We've been able to store more data, we can process them more, and so on. But when you really combine them all together, it is really creating some revolutionary capabilities. So just to give some of the enablers of big data, right? So in the compute, we all know the Moore's law, right? Just between 2000 and 2011, in the 10 to 11 year time frame, the number of transistors that you can put on a chip has actually increased 1 million times, right? So just in 11 years. And storage density in 50 years has increased. Ability to put X amount of storage in a particular area, surface area, has increased 17 million times, okay? And the storage cost, for example, a flash drive in 15 years ago for a gigabyte used to cost around $8,000, 1 gigabyte. Today, or like a year ago when we checked this, it was $1.25, right? 8,000 to $1.25, okay? So no wonder we are storing a lot of information, and there are more than 8 billion devices like your phones and all connected to the internet, right? So there's a huge amount of data being generated, they're being stored, it's cheap to store. And obviously its ability to process them all is pretty impressive. While having said all that, I think people get too enamored with too much data. At one level, maybe too much information really creates some other scarcity, which is scarcity of attention, right? You really need to figure out, for every problem, you need to figure out what is the hypothesis, what is the right type of data you need to collect, and then do the scientific method of discovery in the analysis phase. That technique has not really changed, right? But ability to really fire those kind of techniques on a second-by-second basis, like what Amazon recommendation engine does for us, right, has been doing for the last 10 years, that kind of predictive modeling technology has tremendously improved. And I think it's just going to be proliferating industries like ours, which did not get created on the internet, but rather we are brick and mortar companies. And we will see companies like ours, government and agencies, universities embracing some of the advancements in big data and technology in a really, really big way. Otherwise, new providers who leverage this will outplace us. So we need to pay attention, but not necessarily get enamored with, like, I need to really analyze exabytes of data or petabytes of data. It really depends on what problem you're trying to solve, what elements of the information you really want to analyze.
Kathy, like that on that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's a very interesting topic, and I think Guru's made some good points. And I'll just fill in a couple comments to that. It is very exciting, and there is a lot of opportunity, and it is growing. If there's a word beyond exponentially, I'd like to use that. And I'll reference very practical applications in the medical industry, where you used to go in before, if you're having heart issues, and they would take a picture of your heart, and now it's videos, right? And so you think about the amount of data that's stored for a single test, and then the keeping of those videos over time. And just in the medical industry alone, I'm keenly aware of the exponential need to store this data for the current issue that's at hand, the current diagnostic at hand, but also the need to store all of that data for the future, right? What does my heart look like now? What does it look like in 20 years? How does it compare? And also looking at those videos, storing them in high density, because we know that in 10 years there'll be medical advancements that will be able to look at high density pictures and see data that we don't recognize as data today. So, I guess I'll echo the exponential growth of data, and the need then to have the tools to assimilate it into information in a meaningful way. Because if you can get caught up in the data and be handicapped by it. I'll go back to something that I brought up in the collaboration, because I think a visualization meaning painting pictures from data in a way that the human brain can look at data and make sense out of it, read information from it. And I think that is a very powerful, growing area that's going to help us take this data, accumulation of data, and again assimilate it into information, which is what the real power is in.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, we are at 1:03. We've got about 12 minutes, and we've got the ability to have some questions. So as promised, we'll take questions from the audience. CMC records all forums for statewide broadcast on the Ohio channel. They are available on YouTube through the CMC website. While at the microphone, please introduce yourself. Thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments. I will cut you off. Let's take our first question, sir.
Very good. My name is Peter McCrae. I have my own national architectural practice, and it's all monitored from right here. We really are in a brave new world. It's fantastic. My question is, isn't personal information security really a fantasy left over from the past? And aren't we really headed towards an inflation of fees and costs to write it off, basically, the same way the credit card world works? Is there such a thing as personal information security anymore, and should we even be worried about it?
Who would like to take that one?
That is definitely, we had talked about provocative. That is very provocative. Well, while we don't know what exactly the future will hold, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, maybe that is the reality. But in the immediate future, though, in the next 10 years, we still have an obligation and expectation of the society to protect the confidential information. We use it as an identity to transact, and then we also have laws that really compel us to protect this information. So it's an interesting question, but in today's world, in the next 10 years, I don't see it going away. We need to find ways to protect it. But on the other hand, the emerging generation, they're writing pretty much everything that they're doing on Facebook. So might as well just go find everything you need to find right there.
You know, that's the right way I read the question. I read it much more a bigger, which is personal information. And someone mentioned earlier the education, and I think younger people are certainly giving away a lot of information. I would argue that we are all giving away a lot of information. Your shopping interests, your likes, your dislikes, let's go back to the big data. Everything that you do, every transaction that you do, whether you're doing it on the internet or you're doing it at a store or you're conversing on your mobile phone, is giving away personal information of some sort that is valuable and being collected and correlated in ways to, well, I'll just stop there. Being for some beneficial ways and perhaps some less than opportune ways.
Not unless you need me to.
Okay, second question, sir.
Hi, Bruce Smith. In his introduction, Dave Kendall mentioned, I believe, the possible phasing out of the public switch network, or as we used to call it in the Bell system, plain old telephone service, or POTS. One of the benefits, or two of the benefits of the public switch network were universal service and dial tone when you lost power. How will this sort of new arrangement provide those benefits?
Another very good question. Stu?
Sure.
Telephone business?
Yeah, not anymore. The redundancy that we put in place and the UPSs, the uninterruptible power supplies that we try to put in those things to sort of keep those kind of issues from really cropping up. If you can imagine the big storm that we had come through here and knock power out and the disruption that would have in communications if we weren't looking at those kind of things as we build out the hosted solution, that's a pretty critical piece that we have to make sure that communication's there. We don't want to streamline communication to just a select kind of group of people. So in our architecture and the way that we've sort of moved forward with that, we've tried to make sure that we had those kind of things in place.
And universal service?
I can't speak to that one. Not off the top of my head. Maybe somebody else can.
I don't have a comment there either. I used to work at AT&T a long time ago, no longer, so I really am not that close to
But
the
they're right here.
advancements.
Yeah.
So David's going to talk to you afterwards related to that subject. Carol?
With the recent, and I guess it's been a couple of months ago now, that we read that the New York Times had been hacked by China and all of the reporters' passwords had been stolen. With Hillary Clinton leaving as the Secretary of State, and she was asked what the greatest threat going forward is, it's cyber terrorism in her opinion. And with John Kerry just recently announcing that he's formed, I'm not sure a committee is the right word, but apparently between China and the United States and any others that they can engage to discuss cyber terrorism and cybersecurity. All three of you are engaged at some level internationally. Could you share a few remarks and comments with regard to your thinking on that?
Yeah, I'd like to take that. It's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Again, as we think about research, and we think about research, we think about that at a global level, right? And our intellectual capital at the university is very precious and very desirable. We have faculty who have spent their whole lifetime accumulating intellectual capital, and other countries may not take that the security around that as seriously as the United States does. And so the risk of losing a lifetime of research to a hacker from another country is very real and very prevalent. And we know, again, that governments may not only support the data security ethics that we would in the United States, but would actually be on the far side of that and would be on the far side of that. The point I was making, we know now, and the other point I was going to make besides research is we also, as a university, feel that educating the global community is really important, and so we reach out to all foreign countries and encourage their students to come on campus and participate in, again, our ethics around education and go back. It made me think of the comment that Guru made about a helicopter coming in, and we have helicopters coming in from all over the world, and so we have to put up the firewalls to protect from the outside, and yet we know that public higher education is really open to all people. So I forget your question now, but I have a lot of passion around it. I'm on a roll.
She's talking about Hillary and Bill. A little bit.
Hillary and Bill. Yeah, so I think Hillary is absolutely right on this issue, and I think Kerry is smart by pulling it together. I think the United States has got to figure out, again, it's this balance thing. How do we share everything that we have? How do we enrich the global community without putting ourselves at risk?
So if I could add on to that, if you have already seen this video, that's great. If you have not, search for Stuxnet. Okay, Stuxnet was a virus that attacked the nuclear plants in Iran and totally disabled them. And it's believed that, I won't go on to say who created it. You can see it on the video. It's fascinating. These kinds of things are really becoming like a weapon, right? Weapon made out of code. So it's really scary. And eventually, I think countries have to engage in diplomacy, because it's like currently what we're doing is cyber nuclear warfare kind of a thing. We're destroying each other in some ways. And I don't think that can actually continue for too long. So probably a combination of counterattacks to really squelch it a little bit, and then at the same time, some diplomacy is the way to really solve it.
I would agree. It is the nature of the beast, at least at the moment. And I know that there are probably pieces and parts of dormant things sitting out there, and we saw it with sort of the thumb drives coming in and some of the other things that were embedded in there that, the normal security piece would be like, what am I looking for here? That it's pretty scary. I think this is, to your point, this is the new, territory for warfare. And the more we can get our arms around it, the better. The problem being, again, is that balance. I mean, how do you balance the open society that we are in the U.S. And with all of the other things that are attacking and trying to make those things crumble, and knowing that we sometimes use those same methods internationally. So,
Jane?
Jane Scott, thank you for being here. This is a relatively broad question. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to be able to phrase it well. But aside from larger thumbs, there are other issues that are happening in our society because of technology and how we're using it. For instance, Kathy mentioned artificial intelligence. We're already having Google decide what comes up on our search, and all these search engines are channeling what we're already interested in. So we're developing a society that's very narrow-minded. We only get the stuff that we're already interested in, as opposed to flipping through the dispatch in the morning and scanning all the articles. The generation now is getting what they're already interested in. They're not getting a broad perspective of our society. Any thoughts on what it's doing to us as a culture, as an informed citizenry, and where the balance is going to be in the future?
Wow. All right.
Yeah. You guys go. Go.
That's great.
That's a good question.
All right, Guru, you're up. It's only because of your name, man.
Well, it's a very profound question. If you really take it, mostly the fear that I have is building on what you commented with the younger generation, because that's what they have come to know, right? Whereas we still have the old media, which could be the paper newspapers, right? We still, skim through them, whereas they are really getting it through these different mechanisms. I hope with everything that has happened, whether it be our fascination with TVs decades ago, and then later on some awareness came along that said, watching that much TV is not necessarily good for your health, and then we have now changed as a society, right? Similarly with other things like cigarette, we have changed as a society. Hopefully, we will really leverage these tools in a very smart way. The current way, if it continues without change, I think it's going to devastate the society in many, many ways. I briefly referenced this concept that when you have too much information, it creates another scarcity. I forget the author who kind of has a nice little paper on this topic, which is it creates the scarcity of attention. So you're not even deep in any particular topic, you're just skimming everything. That's another worry that I have, that in some ways you can actually access a lot of information online. You cannot really create original thought if you don't have some deep knowledge about some of them, so you can actually augment it with the others. So there are many, many ways, tentacles of what you just now said, that will be profound. But we as a society have proven to course correct as things get too bad, right? So that's the hope I have.
Yeah, I want to challenge that a little bit. That was a very good question, and I think there's an element of truth to it. But I also think that the availability of news, immediate news, widespread news. I listen to the BBC. Isn't that interesting to hear what they're saying? So I think which I'm not sure was so available, 5-10 years ago. So I do think there's an element of truth to what you're saying, but I think that the availability for widespread information and having a 20-year-old at home, his knowledge of what's going on in the world is pretty impressive. And so they may not sit down to the newspaper like you and I have done, but I think that there are other ways for them to gather information so that they don't fall into that vicious cycle of silos.
Actually, in some of the tools we use, there is definitely a monopoly, and that could be, in some ways, the creator of some of the challenges that you talked about. And we've seen that happen in other industries, and then they break away, right? So hopefully that's one way to really create that diversity of different ways of getting different filters of information.
And I think, those are spot on. I think the whole culture thing and the how our 17-year-old will deal with those kind of things, I think will be course corrected through that process. As we get more feeds from different areas and we begin to grow in our knowledge base, it won't always be, well, I just power up my iPhone, whatever it may be, and here's my set information, and these are the feeds that are more in line with what I want to do. Now, there's a positive side to that, to your point, on, hey, I only buy J. Crew, so I got J. Crew, I got the latest sales. So there's a flip side of that as well. And even when you start to talk about where we're going to be and hopefully with some of the things that will be happening with paraplegics and being able to support that type of activity, and that artificial intelligence piece is going to be a critical thing as well. So
very good. Thank you, panel. I'm going to turn it over to Rich. Thank you for the questions. So you here?
I'm just going to stand here because
Okay.
I didn't want to walk in front of all of you. It's obvious that it is TMI, and maybe we ought to meet more frequently on this topic because we can't cover it in 45 minutes. But you've done a great job, and we thank you very much. You can all share it again and watch it on YouTube, even on your phone, and you can link to our CMC website. We can continue our conversation out in the lobby with coffee and cookies. I'm sure these folks will stick around for a little while. Next week's forum, you can't miss it. It's a little bit more mundane, but it's delectable. Food Nation, please come. And I want to thank today's sponsors, AT&T, OCLC, and Help Wizards. Thank you to our speakers, Kathy, Stu, Guru, and John. Thank you for moderating. Don't forget to, we recycle, we're green, we recycle our name tags, so put them in the basket. If you want more information about CMC, stick your business card in the back of the name tag. Thank you all for coming. Come back often. Thank you.